Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this Insider's Guide to Building Your Audience on YouTube. My name is JOLYON RUBINSTEIN, and I'm a digital native. No, I'm not really. I remember, getting my first Facebook account after uni, and now looking at my cousins with them and not really understanding what the hell they're doing on things like Snapchat. Not like anyone else in this room, who I'm sure is all on Snapchat and, totally proficient with it. So, if you haven't already, we were going to encourage everybody to download the app and start having a look at putting questions to us through that. But of course, as in all these situations, the app's gone down. So we'll be going old school and doing a thing which not many people know how to do anymore with their smartphones, which is just putting your hand up and asking a question. So we'll be doing that later, and we do definitely really want to hear from you, because we are so pleased today to be joined by such a strong panel. We have people, leading producers, broadcasters, and someone from a digital content studio who I'll introduce you to shortly. But we're here to talk about how and why you should look to build audiences on digital platforms to support your shows. We'll talk about the successes, the challenges, some top tips from our industry panel, and some strategies to look at what the future may look like, certainly at least for the next 48 hours online. We all know that it's not a kind of one-size-fits-all model, depending on your genre, your audience, the demographics that you're chasing. But I'd like to introduce you to my panelists. We're so delighted to have them here to share their experiences and help us better understand how to get the best out of digital platforms. So, Selma, can you tell the audience a little bit about who you are?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Selma. I'm a co-founder of Little Dot Studios, which is digital native, for real, digital native, content studio and a distribution business set up about 5.5 years ago. And we work with a number of different broadcasters and IP owners, TV production companies, helping them manage their social video across all platforms. But we also produce our own content, so stuff that we kind of developed in-house that has that digital DNA, but also working very closely with brands and advertisers, and kind of just trying to figure out what this space looks like and where the hell is it all going.
Jo.
I'm exec producer at BBC Three, so as I'm sure a lot of the audience know, we are now a digital channel for the last 3 years. So we are all about being where our audience are. So our remit is to appeal to 16 to 34 audience, and we all know that audiences have changed, and the way that an audience consumes content is different from how it was for somebody like me when we had 4 channels to choose from. So at a time when choice is so huge, and the way that content can be consumed and the different platforms that it's on, it's really important for BBC Three that we are operating on all of those platforms, creating bespoke content, which is not an afterthought. So we've made content that's specific for each platform, and yeah, we want to sort of share some of our learnings.
Wim.
So I'm Wim. I work at the Endemol Shine Group. We are the largest independent TV production company, actually the largest independent content production company, I should say, in the world. We probably work with each and every one in the room here, creating great shows to go on all the platforms. And as part of my role of Chief Strategy and Commercial Officer at the group, I look after our digital activities as well, helping the business basically think more holistically around how we produce our shows and make sure that they have a presence on all platforms, present from YouTube to Facebook to Amazon to everything else imaginable out there.
So can we please hear it from my wonderful esteemed panel? You're a nice bunch, aren't you? So before we really sort of dive in, I'd like you, the audience, to start asking yourself how social media platforms have added value to your particular content. because we'll come towards this at the end, and I think some of the best panels I've certainly ever been to are a lot more interactive, giving you a chance to speak directly to these you know, to our esteemed panel, and that's certainly what we intend to do today. There are different ways to connect, you know, with audiences, different devices, different platforms, different forms of engagement which are most appropriate for different genres. And Selma, I'd like to dive in with you first. How has the kind of conversation shifted in the industry? I mean, if you sort of paint us a picture of where we were when you sort of founded Little Dot and where we are now.
Well, that feels like about 100 years ago in digital years. So that was, I guess, I mean, both Andy and I were at all three kind of looking at what do these platforms mean for traditional linear TV producers. You know, why are we setting up these Twitter accounts? Why are we setting up Facebook pages? What are you know, why is this why is our content on YouTube, and what is the relationship that we have, and do we have one, and do we have a permission to have a conversation, right? And do we have a relationship there, or do we need to kind of establish one? And if you worked in digital for as long as I have, which is over 20 years, and I have backed some weird stuff along the way, so I thought WAP is going to be everything. I worked at Shazam in 2001, where you had to like send a text message, hold your phone like an idiot. So you know that there are these sort of patterns that every 3 or 4 years there is something really exciting and interesting that is a piece of tech development, but you learn that, that there has to be more, right? So what we felt when we started Little Dot, that there was a perfect storm, right? That there was a new type of audience, there was a massive tailwind really behind YouTube, and there are new creators, and I think for us it was an interesting moment to really just jump off the cliff and say, well, let's see where this takes us, right? So YouTube was the only platform, actually. Facebook video didn't exist, Snapchat wasn't around, and that was only 5.5 years ago. So it just shows you sort of the speed at which, you know, these industries and platforms change, and the way these audiences move. You know, you're now thinking about an audience that only knows Snapchat and doesn't know anything else. So our interest was really to sort of learn and understand insights and data. You know, when you come from TV, you're in this really wonderful borderline protected relationship, right? You're known for your creativity, you come up with ideas, you go to a broadcaster who will give you some money to, you know, do development, get a taster, and then you get a commission. Off you go and you make it, and you make these wonderful, amazing pieces of content, and then you hand it over to market to someone else. So I'm just going to share like top 5 things that I wish someone told me 5.5 years ago, and would have been much easier as a journey. So we thought, oh, it's a video. Of course, video is a video. We know how to do that. Absolutely clueless. I mean, I would have had much more advantage if I worked in radio production to go from radio to digital, because essentially the relationship is one-on-one. I think Joe can talk about this a lot, which is, you know, the beauty of TV structure and sort of setups. That's completely out of window. You have 5 seconds to sell your idea, tell your audience what they're after. Otherwise, the choice is endless. Really learning who you are. Like, we were newcomers, so you know, kind of on one hand you competing with a bedroom producer who masters at you know, connecting with their audiences, moving between platforms but have 0 production values. Like, well, who are we? Because we're professional content producers. Data, the importance of data, but also learning what to do with that data. You know, you go from the world of sort of overnights and papers' reaction to your show, what's happening on Twitter, to, you know, having insights, live analytics, and you're like, do I react to this? Do I change my edit? Do I change my distribution strategy? And having that knowledge, I think, is really important. And then talent is the last piece. You know, you're stepping onto a platform where you're dealing with creators who have been doing it for a long time. They really know what they're doing, and it's kind of a journey that you go on and trying to figure out what do you mean for that type of talent, and why would I engage with you? That's what it looks like. Look, you know, we're still learning. I always say there's no such thing as mistake in digital plays. And it's sort of dynamic content creation. You know, it's not finite. You know, you kind of keep learning, and I'm sure what I've known now, by the time this session has ended, something would have changed out there.
Joe, coming from BBC Three and having made the switch from, you know, linear to digital, how and why are the social media platforms becoming such an important part of the offering?
So we, as I say, have got a remit to appeal to 16 to 34-year-olds. We need to be where they are. Damien always says fish where the fish are, which I think is a good sort of metaphor. But to sort of extend that out, optimisation becomes really important, because once you go to that place where they are, you need to hook them in, because, as I say, choice has never been greater. So for us, we need to understand each of the platforms, how they work, how they're consumed, what's the style, what's the form, and form and structure is something that I talk about quite a lot. Having come from the TV world, before I went into digital sort of 7 years ago, you know how to make a programme for your channel. You know what Channel 4 wants, you know what BBC One wants, and all of a sudden you've got to relearn all of those patterns and behaviours, because if you try and put a piece of 9 PM Channel 4 content onto YouTube in the way that it is, it's going to probably bomb. So you need to change your structure, and when you create a piece of content that's bespoke, it needs to be in the style and pattern of a piece of content that a 16 to 34-year-old would watch on YouTube. So we've got an important role at the BBC to innovate, and that's something we look to do all the time. It doesn't mean we always get everything that we do right, but most of the time we're growing and growing and growing. So in the last year alone on YouTube, we've grown by 600,000 extra subscribers, so we're nearly at 1 million. We've made YouTube first strands. So A Tattoo to Change Your Life was created for YouTube, knowing that a huge search term and traffic around tattoos, and actually we knew that our audience, we know on YouTube very well, wants purpose, really rich, deep content. So that series actually looks at people who need a tattoo, for instance, to cover self-harm scars or something like that. So there's story behind it, and there's always story behind everything we do, but we need to look at data, get them in really quickly, and then fulfill the promise of the title. So if you're promising something in the title, you can't, clickbait doesn't work on YouTube really. You need to deliver, because you're going to see in your audience the drop off. So we're continually innovating, continually learning every time there's something new. So, you know, Instagram TV a couple of weeks ago, we need to be there. Facebook premieres, we're there. You know, every new advance, we need to be sort of giving it a go and finding out very quickly how it works.
Wim, Endemol Shine, you know, has produced some of the biggest TV shows of all time. So, you know, trying to understand what the value of digital platforms is for the business, and what barriers in your business you had to sort of overcome in terms of your TV relationships, internal kind of commercial challenges.
Yeah, so I think Selma said there's no such thing as a mistake in digital. I look at it slightly different. I think there's many mistakes, and we probably made them all in the beginning. Our digital efforts really started off as a very MCN creator focused on doing what our business is built on, actually creating a piece of content, turning that into a format and traveling it worldwide. And we tried to do that actually through our operating companies, formatizing something and then reproducing that in 28 different languages and self-publishing it on all of these platforms is a great way to lose a lot of money in a very short time. We did that rather effectively for a short period of time, and then copped on and said, hang on, what is our our content, what is our company actually built on, and that's the great content, as you say, we have. We got an archive of over 4,000 formats, and as you say, some of the biggest shows in the world, and so we started, very much like Joe said, really looking at the data and say, okay, what works here? What actually is getting an audience? What actually is working on these platforms? And very quickly copped on to a certain amount of things, refocused our strategy initially really around the monetization of our existing IP, started to build those audiences, started to work really on audience development. And so the challenges obviously that came with that is that our relationships in this business as a content producer are very much B2B, so it is shifting that mindset a little bit initially, first from being a little bit more to the end user of your, what ultimately is your product directly. Start thinking how they look at it, what is shareable, what works on what platform, from length of content to actually the posting schedule to engaging with those audiences, allowing them to comment, allowing them to build a community, very much also looking at what is already out there around our content on a UGC basis and see what people like, and then starting to develop the overall network. We're not a platform owner. We, as I said, work with everyone. We very much get most of our content commissioned, and actually I think through working with partners like YouTube and Facebook, or the Netflixes, the Amazons, etc. of this world, through our self-publishing actually we also see that we are getting in commissions, and the data we get of our 2.5 billion monthly views on all of these platforms is very useful actually to feed back into the business. So I think it's a journey to sort of prove, yes, there is value in doing things on social channels, and I'll talk hopefully later a little bit about what we do in markets like Brazil, where the full episodes of MasterChef go on air on YouTube immediately after the TX of the show, and are actually raking up way bigger audiences there, and that's done in full collaboration with our broadcast partners there. In Spain we do it on Operación Triunfo, where we run the 24/7 live stream of the show consecutive to the program that goes on air on the public service broadcaster, who is not allowed actually to put any advertising on the channel, but with whom we can partner actually to run the advertising on the YouTube channel, and both can actually win, which creates actually a bigger budget to run the show. And so everybody is winning in that relationship, because it's actually driving traffic back to the linear channel on the show, which I think YouTube definitely can talk about, because you can see it from the stats that the final of that show in Spain never had a bigger audience than it's had now, and that was a show that had been on air for 6 years, off air actually for 6 years. So it is a very fragile but a well-balanced ecosystem, where actually the linear channel and the social channels both have their role to play, and I think if you play them well, I think there's a great future for some of the big brands that are sitting in companies like All3 or Animal Shine or the BBC.
Can I ask a quick question? How did you make that decision to premiere or have a simultaneous release of the full-length show, both on YouTube and broadcaster? Is that purely promotional, looking after audience, or there's like a monetization piece there as well that's important?
There is a bit of both.
Yeah.
So I think when we were trying to get that show back on air, I think we all know that the audience on linear channels aren't exactly getting younger. We were talking about it before the show, and we know actually that it's possible for brands and shows to reach that younger audience on different channels actually. I was going to say planets. They almost are different planets. But you see actually that the audience is very much multi-screen at the moment, and so we said together with the broadcaster, okay, how can we actually develop a strategy, and RTE we're very open about it. In Spain they said, yeah, listen, we probably can't afford to do a show this big just with public broadcaster money, how can we develop a strategy that actually makes it work? So it's basically the audience building as well as the monetization, where our teams very actively went out to sell sponsorships against it. You have the usual AdSense, monetization, etc. And we got brands and yeah, a younger audience engaged around that show again, which really helped getting it back on air.
Well, we're going to be talking about sort of the changing nature of the value chain throughout today's session. But now let's focus in on what Wim was just mentioning in the idea of building an audience, because the fundamental difference on the social channels is the relationship and dialogue which social media plays a key part in creating between the content producer and the audience. Now, globally, more than 60% of watch time on YouTube happens on mobile devices. So we're going to talk about how you engage and build communities on different platforms. So let's look at 3 specific case studies. Selma, do you want to introduce yours first?
Are we talking about real stories?
We are.
Okay. Got a lot of case studies. So it's interesting, you know, as I mentioned, when we started, we set off on this journey to learn distribution, data, how to produce for social platforms, sort of cost efficiencies, and what do we do with this understanding? And actually working with advertisers as well, because one important thing that we're not always talking about is the business model, right? Everything is shifting and everything is moving at different, it's kind of out of sync. But really, we're not reinventing business models. Someone has to pay for this content eventually. It sounds like Endemol were happy to pay for it in-house. But it's either going to be a viewer or it's going to be an advertiser. I mean, if someone knows that third way, please let me know. I'll be grateful for that insight. So when you put all of it together, we're like, okay, so what do we do, right? We work with TV production companies and IP owners and successfully manage social videos, and we learn how to move audiences around. We know how to repurpose content. I mean, the good news for a TV production companies is your content is never old in social. You know, we run Gordon Ramsay channel that has millions and millions of subscribers and has more views than some of the cable channels without a single piece of original content ever being created. So we do kind of look and like, oh, you know, it's YouTube and people just watch dogs on skateboards and stolen content and, you know, kind of crazy stunts. But having had access to so much data around the ways audiences consume television content on YouTube, a pattern started emerging around sort of factual documentaries, right? We were noticing things like younger audiences were watching long-form documentaries, and if you look at the traditional TV business model, the sort of, you know, the reality shows and massive push behind scripted has left very little sort of airtime for amazing documentaries that are usually passion pieces that take, you know, 3 years to make. So we set up a channel called Real Stories, and what was interesting is that for the first time we started playing with a longer form content. So we licensed something like 1,000 documentaries, and maybe we can just play promo.
Can we please see the VT for Real Stories, please? It's fascinating, isn't it? Because it sort of runs counter to the narrative that there needs to be a specific length of content on YouTube. You know, this sort of deep dive with younger audiences. So that was one of the core findings that really drove you towards this. Yeah,
I mean, you know, I mean, we manage so much content on YouTube, something like 3 billion views a month of premium television content. So you have, I mean, in a scale of YouTube, I guess that's not big, but in a scale of TV content, that it's really interesting, right? And, you know, keep on coming back to data. It's such an important skill set to acquire, to really understand how that content moves, how do you play with algorithms and which platforms are important for you and when. I mean, I don't know where this idea of digital content has to be short content came from. Probably to, you know, give us less money to make that content. But I think that length doesn't really matter. You know, the content should be as long as it needs to be, and you know, that's the nice thing about playing in digital space, is it's entirely your decision, and you don't really have to commit to half hours or 45 minutes or kind of commercial hours. So then on back of, you know, kind of building a brand through licensed content, you know, thank you to broadcasters and production companies who made those wonderful documentaries that sort of helped us you know, make a next step, which was, okay, how about we now start experimenting with our own original content? And it was really interesting. So we've gone into, and that's the role that you play, right? You're a producer, you're a talent wrangler, you are a commissioner, you're a scheduler, you're a data person, I mean, kind of everything. So we decided to commission some original docs that were anywhere between 15 and 20 minutes, and it was really interesting how much of that commissioning process was actually influenced by data. Right? This is what people are watching on the channel. I mean, it's quite broad as a channel proposition. The human interest documentaries, but you know, this is what people are watching at this point, or this is specific for, I don't know, this is the sort of thing that should go on Facebook. And so we commissioned about 20, purposely didn't make those in-house. It was really important for us to kind of go back to a TV production community and work with, you know, kind of docs makers who do this really well and do it for a living. And it's interesting, right? I mean, some of them, it takes a while, right? You know, everyone expects, you know, instantaneous success and results, but they're all kind of building over time. And why we're doing this is, I mean, 3 reasons, right? So Real Stories started on YouTube, and it's now an OTT and SVOD, and we're trying to build a destination brand. You know, can Real Stories become, you know, kind of a next generation brand for documentaries? So yeah, I don't know. Maybe let you know next year.
So if you you self-commission then those pieces of content, with regards to the ROI on that, do you regard that as an individual on each individual piece of content, or do you really look holistically at the channel and what it does to your channel in terms of whether you think that's a success or?
I mean, combination of stuff, right? I mean, the good thing about monetization on YouTube, once you have, I mean, that's 1.7 million subscribers, you know, digital pennies start adding up, right? But obviously it's not our content, so we kindly distribute those digital pennies. Look, you know, for us it's kind of a strategic move, right? We not it's a limited amount of money to really learn and understand. I mean, it's very hard to build a channel without having original content, so I think it's really important as a brand exercise. And the second thing is, actually, can we recoup? If you invest 20,000 in making a documentary, what are the chances of getting that money back just purely through advertising? Behaving like a broadcaster essentially, and taking that slate out into the market and talking to advertisers just to see whether there are partnerships there. Obviously, you know, that is much more about the audience on Real Stories, which is what advertisers are interested in, but also there is an opportunity to get involved in production of some of that content. So the answer is, for this phase, it's really to experiment and prove the business model, or actually figure out what the business model is. Are there any licensing opportunities in that short form content? And as always, you know, can you surface an interesting idea where that 20-minute documentary becomes a pilot, and there is really a justification and a lot of data as to why something should exist
I'm keen to sort of make sure we have enough time with the audience.
Sure.
So we're just going to move through these case studies. So Wim, the first episode of Mr. Bean, starring Rowan Atkinson, first broadcast on the 1st of January 1990. There were actually only 14 episodes of the live action series that were ever made, but since then, Mr. Bean has become known all over the world. So let's have a look at Mr. Bean's journey on YouTube. So if we could play the Mr. Bean trailer.
Hi, good evening, everybody. Evening. Bean, Mr. Bean. Bean! Get out of the door! Oh, it's me! Come on. Thank you. I'm gonna... Cheese! Go on, press the button.
Mr. Bean there. So what do you think made this particular property such a kind of behemoths global success on digital platforms?
So first of all, 1990, for those of us old enough to remember, it's the same year actually the internet was invented, funny enough.
Big shout out to Tim Berners-Lee.
Exactly. 28 years ago, as you say, 14 episodes originally. I think what made this a success is really the data, right? We went back in and started looking for things actually within our network where we had ownership of the IP. We were in control actually of what got uploaded, what got posted, and we were looking, so gave the team a very clear guidelines saying, go and look for content that is evergreen, preferably completely language agnostic, that has the potential to reach a global audience. So I think you mentioned 1.7 million subscribers. If you start tapping in just the UK or just the German or just the French audience, you start immediately limiting yourself. And then the last thing was, what is there out there that has a huge community, and the community can be as simple as basically people stealing your content, uploading it to a channel and monetizing it. It's as horrible as it may sound, it is a great indicator that people actually like your content and that they think there's something there. So we started looking at that, and initially we started working with partners like YouTube and Facebook and saying, okay, what are people exploiting out there of our content that is really ours? So we started putting a very aggressive claiming strategy in place and started actually reclaiming all that user-generated content, starting pulling a lot of it into our channels. And a lot of it originally was around those 14 original live episodes that were created. The company then sort of took the punt to say, okay, is Rowan willing to do another few episodes? Well, probably not immediately. So how can we actually get more content on the channels that will actually work? So how about animation? And so through Tiger Aspect, one of our UK labels, animated content around Bean was created, and funny enough, it did incredibly well. It blew new life into the channel. And so a second commission of animated, both on linear through the whole distribution network, so it doesn't have to be funded by the digital exploitation only. That content sold extremely well around the world through our distribution network. And so as we started to build the channel, started to obviously look with the rise of Facebook at Facebook and how do you build an audience on Facebook. Start doing things such as live feeds on YouTube to start actually working with the YouTube algorithm and say, okay, how do you get more viewership on your channel? Those things are incredibly important. The importance of live, I think, on something like YouTube is often underestimated. Mm-hmm. It may not monetize at all, but for your overall network, it really adds a lot of engagement on there. You get people commenting, you get more and more engaged users, and for a brand that is 28 8 years old. We're adding 14,000 subscribers every single day on Mr. Bean on that channel. So I think if Netflix were to have those numbers, sort of free of charge, they'd be fairly happy. Yeah.
Fascinating. So Joe, talking about building audiences across platforms, One Hot Summer, which is a show that you're approaching with a kind of content creation strategy in a totally different way to traditional TV or what BBC Three has done to date. Can you tell us a bit about the programme before we show the clip and discuss a bit more?
Sure. So One Hot Summer is a series where we take a group of 13 under 25-year-olds who are in mini friendship groups on a road trip across Spain, and you'll see it's a bit more than a travel log. Okay,
so can we play the VT for One Hot Summer, please? Fascinating. I mean, it seems to me that it's this incredibly inventive blend of kind of UGC and also taking very, highly sort of evolved, constructed scenarios. And what was the sort of mix of how that was looked at, and was it platform first and looking at specific content for those platforms?
I think we knew we wanted to make what we're calling a social first commission. So we knew we wanted to make content that spoke to our audience and was served to them in the places that they are. And if they chose to watch something on each platform, that they felt satisfied, or that they wanted to go on that onward journey afterwards. So the biggest thing for us is that you need to think about all of these things in your pre-production process. So for a lot of people in independent companies or people working for broadcasters, digital is sometimes a bit of an afterthought. So, and you can repackage content that you've already created, and we do that very successfully across the BBC. So we take a lot of BBC One content and we create little bespoke elements around it, and it gets a new life online, which is great. But with this, we knew that even at the casting process, when we were casting these 13 kids, that elements of their story, we had to think about what was going to work well on each platform. So if we look at YouTube, that could be everything from holiday hookups and friendship through to knife crime, mental health, thoughts of suicide, all of these sorts of things. And we know what our audience wants on YouTube, as I said before. So we cast these characters with those kinds of things in mind, knowing that we would be able to use their stories in different ways. We encouraged, so we were editing as we're going. In fact, our last ep is this coming Sunday on iPlayer, but we're editing as we're going along. So we encouraged them to use social media. There was no shutdown on their social. That's in terms of sort of not patronising our audience. We have no VO on anything at all. They need to speak for themselves. So if you're consuming the content, you can see all of their thoughts as you go along. And then using data. And we've all talked about data, and data can sound so dry, but data is really exciting in this landscape because you can change your content continually, and as Selma and Wim have both pointed towards, rather than just one TX and potentially a repeat, it's like a library of content. It lives there forever. So if something's not quite working, you can change it. You can change the title, you can change the image at the most simplest form. But we realised on our first ep that we put out that we had little spikes within the episode. So you go and look and you think, what are these spikes? What is it? And it was either moments of deep conversation, which was great for us because that's what we were hoping to do with it, but also conflict. So anytime there was any sort of argument or row, that did well. So that informs your next edit. So the following week, you've got your rushes and hang on, that's going to perform really well. We should put that near the front. And it's fascinating, absolutely fascinating. It's much sort of deeper understanding than you can get just from overnight ratings on something. You can drill a lot deeper into what people...
And it seems that integrated into the very sort of core fabric of the show is the use of all social media platforms in their nascent form.
Yeah, and as I say, encouraging those guys to embrace with it, and all of the engagement we've had and comments has been, this is stuff that we're talking about, and it's talking to us. And I think that's because we've taken it to the places they are, rather than build it, they will come. That just doesn't work for our young audience. So we need to deliver it for them. And And just sort of slightly off, but a real note about this series for me, something I've been really proud of at BBC Three, is that we'll probably talk about talent, and we like to nurture talent, and we'll come on to that. But the team behind the cameras, actually, we're a really young team of passionate, creative people who, a lot of them are under 30, and actually I think it's because that team were on the ground with those contributors, that's why we got the stories we got, that's why we got such personal stories from them, because it was people talking and being directed by people like them, and diverse as well. So yeah, it's been something that we've learnt a lot from, and we'll look to use the same model in future for sure.
Well, look, I'm going to sort of hopefully very soon open up to the audience, and I think just to say, this is a safe space. There's no question that's too simple about digital here, and I think one of the reasons that certainly in our discussions before we think that sometimes things don't get asked is because they seem obvious, and in fact they're intrinsic. So we're going to be talking a bit about data being the new gold coming up, but sort of optimizing both as you were saying, pre-production, production and distribution. Obviously in the States, particularly carpool karaoke, lip sync battle, mean tweets, drop the mic. What do you think's sort of been preventing the UK from creating this type of digital success?
That's a good question. Not that the UK can't create that content. I mean, you sort of have to remember that the formula is the same, right? And from my very limited exposure to the US TV, it is all about that talent, right? So if you drop Corden out of carpool karaoke, would it have been as successful as it was? And we've seen these formats before, but I think what was interesting, I think I can just hear my echo. Yeah. I guess what is interesting is that if you look at what Jimmy Kimmel did, and the ways they integrated user-generated and YouTube into their kind of offering. So it's not just a place that you go and drop some behind-the-scenes stuff or you promote the show. It becomes a really important part of your TV show and offering. So you just reach a wider audience, and it's not that we can't do it here. You just have to be open to saying, this is going to sit on YouTube, or this is going to be YouTube first, or this is, let's really. And it's a question for broadcasters, really. Are you open to? Do you want to see pilots and shows that come to you with data and knowledge and insight, or we're not ready for that conversation? It's still very much about, this is what I'm looking for, and then you go away and come back. I think
it's on top of that's probably a challenge for the platforms as well, right? I think the US is a huge market by the amount of ad dollar spend, and if James Corden makes a carpool karaoke and drives everybody into McDonald's, you can be pretty sure that there is a pretty big marketing budget associated with that. That in itself will pay actually for the creation of that simply for a digital platform. So I think if we really want to see that level of creativity come out of the UK or any other European market, I think the platforms have a role to play as well, and the YouTubes and the Facebook have a role to play in commissioning that type of content. And also putting their money where their mouth is and say, okay, we are going to back that creativity. We are a truly global platform, and we will back that, and we will back that level of creativity until those things are up and running and can basically suffice for themselves, because it takes a little bit of time to build that audience and to build something that is actually meaningful enough for either a production company or a broadcaster or an individual creator to do that. So it's the whole ecosystem needs to be in place to actually do that. It's the notionality of value, isn't it? I mean, things like carpool, karaoke, those segments were doing so well online, and the overnights for the show, were being dwarfed by those figures. And John, I'm fascinated by what you're saying in terms of, coming from, a broadcaster and building in that into pre-production and stuff. So in terms of, speaking to independents here, how would they approach you in terms of, coming to you with, would it be a social plan, an engagement plan with the proposition, with the IP, or?
Well, we're still you know, we're open for business, and in terms of short form content and long form content, if someone comes with a really great idea and a really original, everything is still story, and content has to be rich, and some elements are no different from linear in that way. But we do obsess about data because we have to. It's a competitive environment, and so I mean, for a lot of people in this room, this is probably. Some people will have heard this before, but there might be people that haven't, and it was the first lesson I learned about YouTube a long time ago, and it sounds so simple to people that are in the space, but it's probably not. And it was one of the guys, I think, from one of the American channels, like Barely Political or something like that, who said, if you can't think of the title and you can't think of the thumbnail, don't make it. And it's sort of true, like everything that we do on our channel now says what it is in the title. Eating with my ex, you know what you're getting within. Things not to say to a gay person, you know what that is. You need to, it's got to be a really clear sell, and it's got to have meat on the bones. So if someone's going to come and pitch a series, but actually it all hinges on 3 ideas, but it makes business sense to go for 10 eps of something. As I say, it still needs to be really strong with story, and needs to be a really clear focus, a clear purpose.
There is so much we could talk about, but I did want at least to have 10 minutes for you to ask questions. I would say again, you know, please, nothing is too simple. I like to do Q&As a bit differently because I think it's really important that female voices get heard as well as male. So I'm going to take a female voice, then a male voice, female voice, then a male voice. It's just how I do Q&A. So would anyone like to ask any questions to our esteemed panel? Okay, you sir, is there a lady who'd like to go first? Come on, guys.
It's okay, boys can go first.
Okay, boys can go first. Thanks.
Hi there, thank you very much, Ali May. Selma, this question is specifically to you. You said you're trying to figure out whether you can make the same amount of money that you're spending on creating a documentary from ads. Are you? And also, sorry, just to follow that up, you have that huge number of followers. If today I started a channel, do I have any chance of making that kind of success, those kind of numbers, in terms of making the money of spend? Thank you.
So I think scale is really important, right? And we happen to be in a fortunate position where we've been doing this for 5.5 years, right? And we have the tools and understanding how platforms work. The biggest challenge, I think, for anyone who's starting from scratch and thinking of building a YouTube brand is, can you continue funding until you get to the scale where your ad revenue might partially contribute to your investment into original content? So the answer is yes. A couple of documentaries actually did really well and made a little bit of money. They probably broke even, but that's not good enough. And if you're starting on your own, you need to commit to it. It's a 5-year plan, unfortunately, and kind of sticking with it and really understanding where do you get your views and how do you approach the platform. One-offs just don't work, they disappear. You know, people will tell you, hey, I made a viral video. I mean, you haven't made a viral video. The algorithm of people on platforms decided that this video is going to be viral because they shared it. You made a good video.
We've got another gentleman here. Is it really?
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll take this lady here, then this gentleman, then this lady here. Gentleman at the back, was it? Just show me your hand, because we want to try and get through as much as possible in next 8 minutes.
Girls at the back.
Right, sorry. There's definitely a guy over there as well. But we'll just, okay. So we'll start over here. I'm sorry. sorry.
Yeah.
Getting confused.
In the middle.
Yeah, sorry. Start in the middle there.
With the red jumper.
Red jumper. Sorry. Help me out here.
Hi, Els Rovers from Belgium for Roses Are Blue. I'm just for BBC Three wondering if you do you share your data with the indies you're working with, and in what way do you would you do that?
Yeah, so we're obviously always it's a collaborative process when we work with an indie, and we sort of hold their hand through our internal commissioners to, you know, we all want that content to work. We all want it to be a success. So absolutely share all of our learnings with them, and that's, you know, and that's something we want to do with everybody that we work with. And so we help shape that content as we go along, from the knowledge that we have got, because we understand that some indies will come to us with not as much knowledge about the digital space as others. And as I said before, if the idea is good enough and we think it's got legs for online and for digital, then absolutely we work together to make that a success, because it's our channel. So if something's going to go on our channel, we need to believe in it and stand by it. And yeah, it's a true collaboration.
Can I just ask very quickly, because as I was saying, I think some people don't ask these things, if you could just say the 3 main data points that's useful for people to look at.
So retention is, you know, watch time, as we're sort of looking at even in the linear space as well, is key. And for us, obviously demographic is our biggest thing, and looking at global and versus UK, they're our kind of main areas of focus. Retention is obviously important, because you're doing something wrong if everything that you make drops like that immediately. You need to fix that if that happens. So our plan is, you know, you get people in and you keep them as long as you possibly can. And the way that YouTube works is then, you know, you take that as an onward journey. So you either go out through annotations or you go out through your end board. If you know you're going to have lost some of your viewers by the time you get there, and hopefully suggestive viewing, that the algorithm should serve that view as well. So they would be our key areas to look at for BBC Three.
Okay, thank you. Gentleman over here.
Question for Wyn. How helpful has having a talent agency within Endemol Shine been for understanding growing audience?
I think talent in general is helpful. I think for traditional TV content production companies, and you both mentioned this as well, it's hard, I think, to produce for digital platforms, because one of the things when I joined the Endemol Shine group 3 years ago now, which was probably a bit of a shock for me, but also a bit of a shock for the organization, is hearing about, well, what is is it premium? So define premium, Ryan. Is it the production budget you put into it, the effort you put into it? And to your point around virality, is I think very cheap content can be premium content. It can be great quality if it captures that moment in live or that meaningful discussion, and doesn't have to be shot in 4K or whatever, because people will be watching it on their phone. So I think there's a lot to learn from how these creators on the platform work, because they bring, I think, a great new way of storytelling. But I think vice versa, it's true as well, and definitely some of the things I have absolutely no interest in sailing. I've never sailed a boat in my life. I'm following a young couple on YouTube that has been sailing around the world for 3 years, because they're great at storytelling and they do that in great quality. So I think actually if you are trying to build a channel and you are in the content production business already, the data and actually the insights you get from the data are more meaningful than actually looking at what creators are going to do. Because if you are going to try to compete with those guys, you're never going to be able to do it with the overheads and everything you run in your business. You're actually much better at looking at what you do well, and then finding what else it is you can do with that content on different platforms. You're all shooting TV shows in very swanky studios. There are many things, I think, that you can do behind the scenes, and actually things that don't make it into the cut that goes onto your linear channel, that you can actually use and that are actually going to be way more meaningful on all of those digital channels than they are going to be on a linear channel ever.
I'm just going to take one last question at the back.
Hi, I'm Angela Chan. I'm Head of Creative Diversity at Channel 4. Question to you, Selma, really. You mentioned about, are we ready to have a conversation about pilots that have started elsewhere? How would you ideally like to see broadcasters change their commissioning model and their behaviour in order to respond to your business model?
No, I mean, it's really interesting question for us, right? We all, we're having a digital session here. I would love to think that we are at a content festival. It doesn't, and there is no difference between, people who are here to hear what a commissioner wants and people who are here to see what we are up to. But the reality is that those disciplines are still being kept as separate. I think a really deeper understanding and slightly more open conversation around, I'm quite excited about the message that's coming out of Channel 4, which is one show, all platforms or multiple platforms, which I think is really, really, really exciting. So for someone like us, we're non-traditional, and we had one TV commission as Little Dot, and it was one-off doc about the life of YouTubers. But we're looking at comedy, we're looking at scripted drama, and our approach. And I know we have to be 10 times better and work harder than anyone else out there in order to afford a conversation with a traditional broadcaster, because we're kind of new kids, right? But we would love to have an understanding of what does that mean, what does digital stand, do you do digital first? What does all four stand for? Are you commissioning one-offs? Are we testing talent? Is that just for spin-offs? And we're quite comfortable to go, we've sort of done it on a comedy pilot the other day, where we just went off and basically built the world on Facebook, shot some videos, wrote script, set the whole world, and it's called Welcome to Ballybag. And we've just gone out to talk to linear broadcasters just to get some feedback, really. We kind of operate with no expectation. I hope that answers that question. It's just kind of more understanding of what digital means and how does that lead to a linear play.
Well, listen, we could go on for hours. I'd just like to thank my fantastic panel, Selma, Joe, and Wim, and they will be around afterwards. I'm JOLYON Rubinstein, and I'd like to thank our session sponsor, YouTube. I hope you've enjoyed it, and hopefully see you all again later in the day.